All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're stepping into a literal masterclass. We're going to break down the overarching philosophy of the Oracle of Omaha himself, Warren Buffett. And we're going to prove that building generational wealth isn't actually rooted in some complex, unreadable math. It is fundamentally about your mindset, your character, and your discipline. So, if you want to figure out how the most successful investor in the world actually operates, you're in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. Character, the foundation. 2. Psychology, the shield. 3. Strategy, the engine. And 4. Time, the multiplier. Think of this whole concept like a giant balance scale. The core premise here is wild but true. Choosing the right company relies on the exact same formula as living a good life. On one side, you have honesty, patience, and boundaries. On the other side, you've got value, long-term thinking, and simplicity. It turns out the inputs for a successful life and a successful portfolio are virtually identical, and they balance out perfectly. Part 1. Character. The unshakable foundation. Look, the stakes here are absolutely massive. You can spend 20 years painstakingly building a reputation, brick by brick, and it only takes 5 minutes for a wrecking ball to completely obliterate it. Those high-yield promises that lack basic integrity, they always go to zero eventually. If you're out there hiring or partnering based on intelligence and energy, but you ignore honesty, well, those first two traits are actually going to destroy you. There's this profound truth you've got to carry with you. Honesty is a very expensive gift. Do not expect it from cheap people. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. I want you to reflect on your own partnerships, whether that's in business or in your personal life. Are you prioritizing flash, intelligence, and energy over basic, fundamental honesty? Now, what's really interesting here is this idea of an inner circle audit. Imagine you're a node in the center of a network. You are directly, constantly impacted by the people immediately around you. The golden rule is to surround yourself with people who are simply better than you. If your friends have behavior and track records that are fundamentally better than your own, you're naturally going to be pulled in that positive direction. So the big takeaway? Character is highly contagious. Before you trust someone, do not just listen to their promises. Look at their actual repeated behavior. Look at their track record. And remember, turning a blind eye to small lies is arguably the single biggest investment mistake you can make. A solid track record will literally always beat a good sales pitch. Part 2. Psychology, mastering your emotions. Picture a pendulum constantly swinging back and forth. That perfectly dictates the nature of markets. On one extreme, it swings into the danger zone, herd mentality, and pure greed. On the other extreme, it swings into the opportunity zone, panic, and fear. In the short term, the market is just a popularity contest driven by this pendulum. But in the long term, it's a ruthless weighing machine. Which brings us to that legendary contrarian mantra. Be fearful when everyone is greedy, be courageous when everyone is fearful. When the market goes into full panic mode and gold is basically raining from the sky, you need to step outside with a bucket, not a teaspoon. Let's actually contrast two types of investors here. On one side, you have the genius but panicked investor. Sure, they have a massive IQ, they trade constantly, but they ultimately get totally lost in the noise. On the flip side, you have the ideal investor. They might not be a certified genius, but they have complete emotional control. When a crisis hits, they don't panic, they simply wait it out. When you plot this out as an intelligence versus temperament matrix, the dynamic becomes crystal clear. Your greatest weapon as an investor isn't actually a high IQ, it's a stable temperament. If you are that ideal investor with emotional control, you win. The source material makes a great point here. The folks who actually take pleasure in standing against the crowd are the ones who succeed. Because if you can't control your emotions, managing money successfully is practically impossible. Part 3. Strategy, where simplicity meets value. Okay, think about the crayon test. On one side of the spectrum, you have this chaotic, messy web of buzzwords, algorithmic derivatives, blockchain integration, AI neural networks, the whole shebang. On the other side, just a simple hand-drawn apple. The lesson here is so profound. Complexity does not equal profitability. True risk comes entirely from not knowing what you are doing. So I really have to ask you, could you explain a company's business model to a kid using only a crayon? Because no matter how crazy advanced technology gets, the fundamental cycle of a business generating cash has to remain simple and understandable to you. If it doesn't pass that crayon test, it's just not worth your investment. And that leads us straight into what we call the golden zone. The absolute ultimate strategy here is buying a wonderful company at a fair price. Not just any company, but one with a deep, long-term competitive advantage, a true moat. Having that moat is infinitely more valuable than just sitting around hoping for a temporary price drop on a totally mediocre asset. When you're diagnosing price versus value, hitting that golden zone is the holy grail. Like the old adage goes, price is what you pay, value is what you get. It is undeniably 100% better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. And this brilliantly illustrates two vital strategic filters you really need to internalize. First off, don't fall in love with the act of endlessly patching a bad business. As the source notes, this was a bitter lesson learned from the original Berkshire textile mill. The effort you spend trying to fix a fundamentally flawed foundation costs way more than just boarding a new sturdy ship. Second, when you do acquire great companies, use cash, not shareholder stock. Look, biological bias, a CEO's ego, and pressure from advisors can totally push leaders to use stock, which just dilutes real shareholder value to feed a buyer's ego. You gotta stick to the discipline of cash. Part 4. Time and crisis, the ultimate test. You know, when the market is booming and the water is high, everyone looks like they're swimming along perfectly fine. These are the invisible risks. But when a crisis hits and the water suddenly recedes, that hidden reality is laid completely bare. The source highlights that massive events like Hurricane Andrew in 1992 for Geico or the 2008 financial crisis proved that complex derivatives act as hidden, lethal financial weapons of mass destruction. Which brings us to literally one of the most famous and bluntly accurate quotes in all of finance. Only when the water recedes can you see who is swimming naked. When the storm actually hits, all that complexity and leverage gets stripped away, and the only things left exposed are character, temperament, and true strategy. But hey, if your business survives that receding water, time actually becomes your greatest asset. Think about it. Someone is sitting in the shade today only because someone else planted a seed a long, long time ago. Time is the absolute best friend of a wonderful business and a patient investor. And on the flip side, it is the ultimate enemy of the impatient and the mediocre. Which all distills down into this fantastic 10-year, 10-minute rule. If you aren't willing to own a stock for 10 years, honestly, don't even think about holding it for 10 minutes. Successful investing isn't about the frantic, raw effort you put in today while staring stressed out at a screen. It's about the space and the time you give your carefully chosen investments to actually compound and grow. So we're going to leave you with this final provocative thought derived directly from Noah's rule. Look, predicting the rain doesn't count for anything. Take a hard look at your portfolio, your inner circle, and your own mindset. Are you just predicting the rain, or are you actually building an ark? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep learning, keep building, and definitely use these concepts to audit your own game plan. Catch you next time.